My name is Evelyn Marshall, and I'm 78 years old. I spent the better part of my life caring for my family, loving my husband, raising my children, and now, quietly enduring the slow passage of time. The house that I've lived in for the last 50 years creaks with memories. Memories of laughter, tears, birthdays, and deaths. My husband, Frank, passed away last year, leaving me with only our children and grandchildren, who rarely visit now that their lives are so busy. But there's one thing I've never shared with anyone. Something that's haunted me for years. Something I should have confronted long ago, but I didn't. And now, I can't keep it in any longer. I never planned on finding out the truth. At my age, you'd think I'd be more concerned with my daily cup of tea and long afternoons spent watching the birds outside my window. But on a dusty afternoon last week, everything changed. I was cleaning out the attic, something I hadn't done in years. As I climbed up the creaky wooden steps, the smell of old books and forgotten memories filled the air. Boxes were stacked high, covered in layers of dust. But in the corner of the attic, tucked under a faded quilt, I found something that took my breath away. Small weathered box. It was locked, with a tarnished key hanging from a string attached to the handle. I'd never seen it before, but something about it seemed familiar. My heart raced. I opened the box with trembling hands. Inside, I found a stack of old letters and photographs. Photographs I'd never seen before. Pictures of a younger version of my father, my grandparents, and a woman I didn't recognize. The woman was beautiful, young, and full of life, but that wasn't what made my breath catch. It was the name written on the back of one of the photos. Margaret Dawson, grandfather's lover. Froze. My grandfather, the man I'd adored and admired for so many years, had a secret, a dark, painful secret that my mother had hidden from me and my siblings. I felt the room close in around me. What was this? Why had no one ever mentioned Margaret Dawson? What else had been hidden from me? Tears welled up in my eyes as I held the photograph in my hands. My hands shook as I turned the letter over. The ink faded with age. It was addressed to my grandmother, but it wasn't written by her. The words on the page were too loving, too passionate. They were words of a betrayal I never could have imagined. I sat there, the letters and photographs scattered around me, as the weight of it all crashed down on me. My heart pounded, and I felt a coldness in my chest that I couldn't explain. The curse of family secrets had been passed down, and now it was my turn to uncover the truth. But what was the truth? Had to know more. I needed to confront the past, before it destroyed my family. But before I could make sense of it all, I heard a sound behind me. A soft tap on the attic stairs. It was my daughter, Claire. I hadn't heard her approach. She looked at me, her eyes widening as she saw the scattered letters and photographs. Her face was pale, and I could see the question in her eyes. "Mom, what's all this?" she asked, her voice trembling. I looked up at her, my heart heavy with everything I had just uncovered. I didn't know if I was ready to face her with the truth. Not yet. I don't know yet, I whispered. Her eyes narrowed, sensing the seriousness in my voice. "What do you mean?" I swallowed hard. This is a story that has to be told. But not yet. Not until I understand it all. Claire stepped closer, her gaze fixed on the box in my hands. "You're hiding something, aren't you?" And that's when I realized, the past wasn't done with me. It had come knocking at my door, and there was no running away from it anymore. What secrets had my family kept buried? What was my grandfather's dark past? And how had it affected everything I had ever known? I didn't have the answers yet, but I knew one thing for sure. This story was far from over. It was only after Claire left the attic, her mind heavy with unasked questions, that I could finally catch my breath. My heart was still racing, and the box with its cursed secrets sat heavy in my lap. I couldn't let it go, not yet. The truth needed to come to light. It was my duty to uncover what had been hidden for so long, but where would I even begin? I had spent years keeping the peace in my family, keeping secrets to myself, always playing the role of the loving mother, the doting grandmother. But the truth had a way of gnawing at your soul, pulling you from the inside out, forcing you to confront the things you'd never wanted to face. I took a deep breath and opened the first letter from the stack. My fingers trembled as I unfolded the yellowed paper. The ink almost faded beyond recognition, but I could make out enough to understand what was written. The words weren't just innocent memories. They were filled with longing, with regret, and above all, with betrayal. The letter was dated 1947. I could feel the weight of history in that one piece of paper, the world it came from, a time when things were simpler yet so much more complicated. My grandfather, James Marshall, had written it to Margaret Dawson, the woman in the photographs. He was apologizing for the affair he'd had with her before marrying my grandmother. But this letter wasn't just an apology. It was a plea for Margaret to leave him alone. He begged her not to come back to their small town, to not tell my grandmother about the affair, about the love they had shared. He had been desperate. He had been guilty. But what struck me was how he referred to my grandmother, Ruth, in the letter. "She'll never understand," he wrote. "I can't lose her. I won't let her leave me over this." I could feel the pain in his words. But then there was something else, something darker. A warning. "She's pregnant with our child. I'm trapped now, Evelyn. Trapped in a life I didn't choose." Name. Evelyn was my name. But that was impossible. My father had never spoken of this. My hand went to my chest, and my breath caught in my throat. Was my father really my father? Had this affair, this lie, shaped the very foundation of my family? A sharp knock at the door startled me from my thoughts. I looked up to see Claire standing in the doorway, her face pale, her eyes wide with something that looked too much like fear. "Mom, I need to know what's going on," she said, her voice shaky. "I've never seen you like this before. What's in that box?" I couldn't lie to her. Not anymore. The secrets were spilling out of me like a river that couldn't be dammed. I motioned for her to sit down beside me, and for the first time, I felt the weight of the years of silence between us. Claire had always been distant, as though she couldn't understand me, or maybe I just hadn't allowed her to. She was always too busy, too consumed with her own life, her career, her problems. I couldn't blame her. I had pushed her away with my own fears. But this was bigger than anything we had ever faced before. "I need to show you something, Claire," I said softly, my voice trembling. "Something about your grandfather, something that I never knew. Until now." She raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about, Mom?" I handed her the letter, and as she read, her face changed. First confusion, then disbelief, then a dawning horror. "Is this true?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Is this really about Grandpa?" I nodded, my heart heavy in my chest. "I always thought Grandpa James was the perfect man," she murmured. "But this doesn't sound like him at all." "No, it doesn't," I whispered. "But it's the truth. And there's more, Claire. There's so much more." I paused, letting the weight of the moment sink in. We were standing on the edge of a cliff, and I didn't know if we could turn back. The secrets that had been buried for decades were coming to light, and they had the power to destroy everything. I could feel the anger building inside of me, the sense of betrayal eating at my core. My grandfather had been a hero in my eyes, a man who had shaped my world with his kindness, his wisdom. But now I could see him for what he truly was. A man who had ruined my grandmother's life, and possibly my own. I had to find out more. I had to know everything. Claire stood up, her eyes fixed on the box. "What are we going to do with this, Mom?" I didn't know. But I did know one thing for sure. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. The silence in the room was thick, pressing down on us both like a weight we couldn't escape. Claire and I sat there, the box of family secrets between us, and neither of us knew what to say. She was still processing what she had just read, the truth slowly sinking in. "Mom," Claire finally spoke, her voice a mix of confusion and disbelief. "Do you think Grandpa knew about all this? The affair, the lies? Did he ever tell you anything?" I shook my head, my mind swirling with the fragments of memories I had of my father, of James Marshall. I had always seen him as a man of honor, a man who never spoke ill of others, who kept to his word. But now I felt like I was looking at a stranger. My own father, a man I had trusted, had kept secrets from me. Secrets that were too big to ignore. "No," I whispered. "He never said anything about it. I always thought he was the perfect man, that he was perfect for your grandmother. And for me. But now, everything is starting to unravel." Claire stood up, pacing the room as if she was trying to make sense of it all. "So what now, Mom? What do we do with this? How do we even begin to tell the rest of the family?" That was the million-dollar question. How could I go to my children and grandchildren and tell them about the betrayal that had tainted their family's history? How could I tell them that their legacy, the family they had always been proud of, was built on lies? "I don't know yet," I replied softly, my hands trembling. "But we can't keep this hidden any longer. It's time for the truth to come out." I knew I had to find out more about Margaret Dawson. She was the key to understanding everything. The key to the curse that had followed our family for generations. But where could I even begin? All I had were old letters, faded photographs, and a name that I couldn't even be sure was real. "I need to know everything about her," I said to Claire, my voice firm. "I need to know who she was, where she came from, and what happened to her. If there's a way to break this curse, I'll find it." Claire stopped pacing and looked at me, a strange mixture of fear and determination in her eyes. "Mom, this is going to be hard. We're digging up a lot of old wounds, and I don't know if we're ready for what we might find. What if the truth is worse than we think?" I knew she was right. The truth often had a way of being uglier than you could ever imagine. But the alternative was to live in ignorance, and I couldn't do that anymore. "I've lived my whole life believing a lie, Claire," I said quietly. "I need to know the truth. And maybe, just maybe, we can heal from it." We didn't speak after that. Instead, I gathered my courage, and we left the house together, heading to the local library. The faded, red brick building had always felt like a place of safety to me, filled with knowledge and history. Maybe, just maybe, the answers I was looking for could be found within the library's quiet walls. As we entered, the musty smell of old books surrounded us. It was comforting, like a memory that wasn't mine but felt familiar. We approached the librarian, a kind woman who had worked at the library for as long as I could remember. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking up from her desk. "Yes," I said, my voice steady now. "I need to find any information on a woman named Margaret Dawson. She lived in this town, probably in the late 1940s or early 1950s. I know it's a long shot, but anything you can find would help." The librarian raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "Margaret Dawson, you say? Let me check our archives." Claire and I sat down at a nearby table, the anticipation building in my chest. The minutes stretched on, and I could feel my heartbeat quickening. What if we found nothing? What if Margaret Dawson had vanished without a trace, leaving no more clues behind than the name on a photograph? After what felt like an eternity, the librarian returned with a thick file in her hands. She placed it down in front of us, her expression unreadable. "This is all I could find," she said, "but it might be what you're looking for. It's not much, but there's a news clipping from 1950. It mentions a Margaret Dawson in relation to a scandal in the town." My stomach twisted as I opened the file, my hands trembling. I pulled out the yellowed newspaper clipping and began reading aloud. "Local woman Margaret Dawson involved in scandalous affair with prominent town figure, James Marshall. Family and community shaken by revelation. Dawson reportedly left town after confrontation with Marshall's wife. Sources confirm the affair had been ongoing for months before it came to light. No further details released. I could feel the blood drain from my face. The affair had been exposed to the entire town. People knew. And yet, my grandmother had never mentioned it. I looked up at Claire, her face pale as she processed the words. "Mom," she whispered, "this changes everything." I didn't know how to respond. The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the weight of what we had uncovered was too much to bear. I felt like the very foundation of my life was shaking beneath me. The truth had a way of destroying everything in its path. But I couldn't stop now. I had to keep going. We left the library with heavy hearts, the air thick with the weight of what we had learned. I held the yellowed newspaper clipping tightly in my hands, as though the ink itself could somehow provide the answers we were looking for. But all it had given us was more questions. Margaret Dawson had been more than just a passing name in my grandfather's past. She had been the woman who had torn apart everything he had built. The affair had been a public scandal. It wasn't just something my grandfather had hidden from my grandmother. It was something the entire town had known about. The betrayal stung deeper than I thought it would. I had always believed my grandfather's love for my grandmother had been pure, that their marriage was one built on trust and honor. But now, I realized that what I had believed to be a love story was just another broken promise in a long line of secrets. As Claire and I drove back home, I couldn't shake the image of Margaret Dawson. What did she look like? What had happened to her after the scandal? Why had she disappeared without a trace? The town's old cemetery, just a few miles from the library, was our next stop. The moment I suggested it, Claire hesitated. She knew I was searching for more, but I think she understood just how dangerous this search was. Digging up the past could have consequences, and we were already knee-deep in something neither of us could have anticipated. But there was something in my gut telling me that the answers I needed lay in that cemetery. Margaret Dawson was a part of this story. Her legacy was tied to the curse I had been carrying for years without knowing it. The wayward affair, the heartbreak. It had all been passed down through the generations. When we arrived at the cemetery, it was nearly dusk. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long shadows across the weathered tombstones. We walked in silence, the crunch of the gravel beneath our feet the only sound we could hear. I felt like an intruder, trespassing on the secrets of a long-dead woman I had never met. "I don't like this, Mom," Claire said, her voice tight. "What if we're digging up things we're not meant to know? What if we're making everything worse?" I stopped walking, turning to face her. Her face was a mixture of fear and concern, and I could see the battle going on inside her. She wanted to know the truth, but she was afraid of what it might do to us. "I understand, Claire," I said softly, "but I can't just pretend this never happened. This is our family. My family. And this woman, Margaret Dawson, she's part of it." Claire exhaled, and I could see her resolve hardening. "Let's find her," she said, her voice determined. We moved toward the oldest part of the cemetery, where the names on the tombstones were barely legible, worn away by time. It took us some searching, but eventually, we found a grave that stopped us both in our tracks. There, etched in stone, was the name, Margaret Dawson. The dates of her birth and death were there too. 1930 to 1963. She had died young, at only 33 years old. I swallowed hard. She had been so young. What had happened to her? Was it related to the scandal? Did it break her in a way no one ever talked about? Claire bent down, brushing away the dirt and leaves that had collected on the gravestone. What if she had a family of her own? What if there's more to this story than we know? The thought hadn't crossed my mind until then. Could Margaret Dawson have had children? Was there a second generation of pain tied to my grandfather's actions? We didn't know. We couldn't know yet. I took a deep breath, staring at the grave. The weight of Margaret's life, her choices, and her eventual death felt like a burden on my shoulders. It was as if she, too, had been a casualty of this family curse. The more I learned, the more I realized how deeply this history was intertwined with my own. But then something caught my eye. At the base of the gravestone, hidden under some overgrown ivy, was a small plaque. It was hard to make out, but it had a single line written in elegant script. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay." Froze. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Was this her final message? Was this what she had felt before she died? The guilt, the shame, the loneliness. Had she regretted her affair with my grandfather? Was she running from the consequences of it all? Claire stepped forward, her eyes wide. "Mom, this isn't just about Grandpa, is it? It's about her too. She wasn't just the other woman. She was trapped too. This wasn't just some scandal. It was a tragedy. I nodded slowly. Claire was right. Margaret Dawson had been a victim of the same lies, the same deceit that had hurt my family. She had been a woman trying to navigate a world that never gave her a chance. We stood there in silence, the weight of everything we had uncovered pressing on us. I realized then that our family's curse wasn't just about betrayal. It was about the consequences of those betrayals. It was about how the past never truly stayed buried, how it haunted every generation that came after. We left the cemetery with more questions than answers. But there was one thing I knew for sure. I wasn't going to stop until I had the full story. The truth had already changed everything, and it would change more before I was through. The next few days felt like I was living in a haze. My thoughts swirling with the faces of people long gone, their lives entwined with mine in ways I couldn't fully understand yet. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see Margaret Dawson's grave, that haunting inscription, and the sorrow that hung in the air around it like a cloud. But I couldn't stop. I knew deep down that if I didn't keep digging, if I didn't piece together the broken puzzle of my family's past, I would never be able to move forward. This truth wasn't just going to disappear. It wasn't just some family drama that could be swept under the rug. It was something bigger, something that had already shaped all of us without our knowing. Claire and I met at the kitchen table the following morning, the same pile of old letters and photos from the attic still scattered between us. The weight of everything we had learned was pressing down on us, but we hadn't given up yet. If anything, we were more determined than ever to uncover the full story. "You were right, Mom," Claire said, her voice soft but firm. "Margaret Dawson. She wasn't just some other woman. She was part of this twisted family story. And maybe she's not the only one." I looked up at her, the flicker of realization in her eyes matching my own. This wasn't just about my grandfather anymore. It wasn't even just about Margaret Dawson. It was about the ripples of their choices, the consequences of the decisions made all those years ago. What had been hidden from us, buried under years of silence, was far more complex than I had imagined. "I've been thinking about that inscription on her grave," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I'm sorry I couldn't stay." Those words don't just speak to her guilt. They speak to something deeper. I think Margaret wasn't just trying to escape the scandal. I think she was trying to escape something inside herself. And maybe, just maybe, she was trying to save herself from the curse that's been haunting our family. Claire leaned forward, her brow furrowing in thought. "The curse. I've been trying to make sense of it. What if the affair didn't just hurt the people directly involved? What if it planted a seed in your grandfather's soul, one that grew over time? What if that's why the rest of us, me, your children, your grandchildren, have been dealing with the fallout for so long?" The idea hit me like a freight train. What if the consequences of their actions were not just isolated to them but were passed down, generation after generation, infecting each one of us? I could see it clearly now. The broken marriages in our family, the betrayals, the unspoken tensions. It wasn't just coincidence. It was a pattern, cycle, curse. I closed my eyes for a moment, the weight of my realization settling in. My mind raced through the years. The arguments between my parents, the times I'd felt disconnected from my children, the broken trust in my own marriage. The threads of all those moments were now tangled together in a way I couldn't ignore. "Mom!" Claire's voice interrupted my thoughts. "What if we're wrong about all this? What if Margaret Dawson wasn't the key? What if we're just digging up things that don't matter anymore? What if we're opening doors we can't close?" I looked at her, the fear in her eyes reflecting my own. The unknown was terrifying. But I couldn't go back now. The truth had already started to unravel, and we couldn't stop it. "We can't let the fear stop us, Claire," I said softly. "We've come too far. We have to understand this. We have to make sense of what's happened. For us, for the family, for the future." And so we made a decision. We would trace Margaret Dawson's life. We would uncover every piece of the puzzle. There had to be more to her story, more to the curse, and we wouldn't stop until we found it. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. The phone rang later that evening, its shrill sound cutting through the stillness of the house. It was a local historian, someone I had reached out to for help in piecing together more information on Margaret Dawson. Her voice was shaky, almost as if she was hesitating to say something. "Mrs. Marshall," she began. "I've looked through the records you asked for and, well, I found something. Something that might help with your search. But it's not just about Margaret. It's about your grandfather, James Marshall." My heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? What about my grandfather?" The historian hesitated, as though unsure how to proceed. "There's a police report from 1949. It mentions James Marshall, your grandfather, in relation to a violent incident. It's not widely known, but it's in the town's archives. I can send you a copy if you want, but I should warn you, it's not what you might expect. A violent incident." My grandfather, a man I had thought of as nothing but gentle and loving, had been involved in something like that. I felt a chill run down my spine. My mind raced with the possibilities. What had he done? Why had no one ever spoken of it? Was this the thing that had set the chain of events into motion? Was this the key to understanding the curse? "I want to see the report," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Please send it to me. As soon as possible." The historian agreed, and I hung up the phone, my hands shaking. Claire, who had been sitting beside me, must have sensed my unease. She looked at me, her eyes wide with concern. "Mom, what is it?" she asked. "I think we're about to uncover something that changes everything," I said, the words heavy in my mouth. "Something that explains the dark shadow hanging over our family." And so we waited. The next few hours felt like an eternity as we anxiously awaited the copy of the report. What had my grandfather done all those years ago? And what was the truth behind the violence that had been kept from us for so long? I didn't know if I was ready to face whatever came next. But one thing was certain. I wasn't going to turn back now. The ghosts of the past were finally coming to light, and there was no way to stop them from haunting us anymore. The night dragged on, each minute stretching like an eternity. Claire and I sat at the kitchen table, the dim light from the lamp casting long shadows across the room. My hands were trembling as I stared at the phone, waiting for the historian to send the report. The silence in the room was suffocating, my thoughts consumed by the unknown. My grandfather, James Marshall, had been involved in something violent, something that had never been spoken of in our family. I couldn't reconcile the man I had loved and respected with the man in the police report. The more I thought about it, the more the image of my grandfather shifted, like a shadow slowly coming into focus, revealing a side of him I had never imagined. "Mom!" Claire broke the silence, her voice low, almost hesitant. "Do you really think this report is going to explain everything? Will it make us understand why things are the way they are?" I looked at her, unsure of how to answer. Part of me wanted to believe that this report, this revelation, would be the final piece of the puzzle that would explain our family's curse. But another part of me was terrified. What if the truth was too much to bear? What if my grandfather wasn't the man I thought he was? Before I could respond, the phone rang. I jumped, startled by the sudden sound. I reached for the receiver, my hands shaking. "This is Evelyn Marshall," I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "Mrs. Marshall, this is Margaret Atwood, the local historian. I've just emailed you the report you requested," the voice on the other end said. "I'm sorry to have to tell you this, but what I found in the archives, it's not just about your grandfather. It's about your entire family." I felt a lump form in my throat. My heart raced. "Please send it now," I whispered, barely able to contain my anxiety. There was a brief pause before she responded. "I've sent it. Please take care of yourself when you read it." The call ended, and I quickly checked my email, my hands clammy with anticipation. The subject line read, "Police report. James Marshall, 1949. My stomach twisted. I clicked the link and opened the file, the words staring back at me. The report was dated from November 1949, a few years before I was born. It was a detailed account of an incident that occurred in the small town where my family had lived. The officer who wrote the report described an altercation between James Marshall and a local businessman, Thomas Kincaid. According to the report, James had been found in a violent confrontation with Kincaid, leading to a physical altercation that resulted in Kincaid being hospitalized. The words seemed surreal, as though they didn't belong to the man I knew. The report detailed how James had struck Kincaid in a fit of rage, his actions fueled by a long-standing feud between the two. The police had been called to the scene after neighbors heard shouting and the sound of glass breaking. James had been arrested but released the same day after Kincaid refused to press charges, claiming he didn't want to ruin a family name. But the part that made my stomach turn was the final line of the report. Subject James Marshall expressed remorse for his actions, claiming that his anger stemmed from personal matters concerning his family. No further action was taken, and the case was closed. I felt the air leave my lungs. Personal matters concerning his family. What did that mean? What could possibly have driven my grandfather to violence? This wasn't just a fight. It was a dark reflection of something much deeper. Claire leaned over my shoulder, reading the report with me. She was silent, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mom," she said softly, "this doesn't make sense. What personal matters could have caused this? Was this connected to Margaret? Did she have something to do with this?" I shook my head, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place but still refusing to make sense. Was this the catalyst for the family's curse? Had James's rage and betrayal marked the beginning of a downward spiral for all of us? "I don't know," I said, my voice strained. "But I think we need to find out. I think we need to understand why this happened." I couldn't stop now. This violence, it wasn't just some isolated incident. It was tied to everything. The affair, the lies, the guilt, the anger that had been passed down through the generations like an unspoken inheritance. This wasn't just a story about Margaret Dawson or James Marshall anymore. It was about the long-lasting effects of their actions, the consequences that had rippled through every branch of our family tree. There was one more thing I needed to do. One more person I had to speak to, someone who might hold the key to understanding the full extent of the damage done. I needed to talk to Kincaid's family. They had lived in this town for years, and surely they knew more about what had happened between their father and my grandfather. But as I stood up, ready to make the call, a sudden thought stopped me in my tracks. What if this isn't just about our family? Claire's voice was quiet, almost fearful. What if the curse goes even further? What if we're all connected to something darker? I turned to face her, the truth dawning on me. We weren't just dealing with secrets that had been buried in our family. We were dealing with something far deeper, a legacy of anger, betrayal, and pain that had seeped into the very foundation of the town we lived in. This wasn't just our story. It was the story of everyone who had been touched by our family's past. I couldn't stop now. The ghosts of the past were coming for us, and there was no turning back. I had to face them. I had to confront the truth, no matter how dark it was. The air in the house felt different now, heavier somehow, as though the walls themselves were breathing in the weight of all the secrets we had unearthed. Claire and I sat together in the dim light of the kitchen, the report from the historian still fresh in my mind, gnawing at my thoughts like a relentless hunger. The words from the police report echoed in my head, personal matters concerning his family. That was the explanation James Marshall had given for his violent outburst all those years ago. But it wasn't enough. It couldn't be. What was it? What was this personal matter that had turned my grandfather from the gentle man I had known into someone capable of striking another person in anger? Claire sat across from me, her eyes clouded with confusion and fear. "Mom, what if this doesn't just change everything for us but for the whole town?" she asked softly. "What if this curse is bigger than we think? What if everything we've been dealing with is connected to something more sinister?" I swallowed hard, unable to answer her right away. She was right. This wasn't just our family's burden anymore. The repercussions of what had happened all those years ago had spread far beyond the confines of our house. There was a whole town that had witnessed my grandfather's actions, who had watched him live his life, seemingly unaffected by the past. But now the truth was coming out, and it was making its way to everyone who had been part of that world. I looked down at my hands, trembling slightly. I had spent so many years building my life, holding my family together, pretending that nothing could touch us. But now I felt as if I had been living in a house of cards, and each secret I uncovered was pushing me closer to the collapse. I had to face what had been hidden for so long, even if it shattered everything I thought I knew about my family. "We need to talk to Kincaid's family," I said, my voice firm despite the doubt clawing at my insides. "They were involved. They know more than we do." Claire nodded slowly, but I could see the apprehension in her eyes. What if they don't want to talk? What if they don't even remember? I knew she was right to be cautious, but the need for answers outweighed the fear. I couldn't ignore the pull, the need to uncover the full truth, no matter the cost. "I have to try," I said, my resolve hardening. "We need to know what happened between Grandpa and Thomas Kincaid. We need to understand how this all ties together." The next morning we made our way to the Kincaid family home, a sprawling, weathered estate on the outskirts of town. I had driven by it many times in the past, but never once had I considered what lay behind its iron gates. The house was massive, perched on a hill like something out of a dream, ornate and grand, with ivy crawling up its stone walls. It was a house that screamed old money, old power, a relic from a time long past. I knocked on the front door, my heart pounding in my chest. Claire stood beside me, her face a mix of nerves and determination. The door creaked open after a moment, revealing an elderly man with silver hair and a tired, weathered face. His eyes locked onto mine, and I could see a flicker of recognition. "Yes," he asked, his voice low but clear. "Can I help you?" "I'm Evelyn Marshall," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "This is my daughter, Claire. We're looking for information about an incident that happened here in 1949. It's about my grandfather, James Marshall, and your father, Thomas Kincaid." The man's face shifted in a way I couldn't quite place, a mix of surprise and something else, something darker. After a long pause, he stepped aside, gesturing for us to come in. "Please come inside," he said, his tone reluctant. "We've been waiting for this day." Claire and I exchanged a glance as we followed him inside, our footsteps echoing in the vast foyer. The house was grand, filled with old furniture and faded portraits of the Kincaid family, their eyes seeming to follow us as we walked. It felt like stepping into another time, a place frozen in history, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we were intruding on something that wasn't meant for us. The elderly man led us into a sitting room, where a woman in her 60s sat by the window, staring out at the garden. She turned when we entered, her sharp blue eyes immediately assessing us. "Evelyn," she said, her voice cool and measured. "I'm Susan Kincaid. My father, Thomas, is no longer with us, but I've heard about you. And I know why you're here." My stomach tightened. It was as if she already knew what we were seeking, what we had uncovered. "We've known this day was coming," Susan continued, her voice steady but tinged with something, guilt perhaps. "And we're ready to tell you everything. But you must understand, this isn't just about your family. It's about all of us." She motioned for us to sit, and we did, our hearts racing with anticipation. I had waited my whole life for this moment, confronting the past, finding the truth, but now that I was sitting here, I felt a deep unease settle into my bones. Susan took a deep breath, her eyes softening. "My father and your grandfather, they were more than just business rivals. Their feud was personal. It went deeper than anyone realized. But the truth is, your grandfather's actions that night, the violence he inflicted on my father, was just the tip of the iceberg." I felt my breath catch in my throat. The night of the fight wasn't just a moment of anger. It was the beginning of something far darker. I needed to hear it all. Susan continued, her voice low but intense. "The truth is, your grandfather's anger came from his own guilt. He was torn between the life he had chosen with your grandmother and the life he had with Margaret. But it wasn't just about the affair. It was about a promise he had made to my father that he had never kept. My heart pounded in my chest. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about broken promises and deep-seated guilt. Susan's eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the same pain I had felt all these years. "The curse," she whispered. "It wasn't just your family's. It was ours too. And now it's too late to undo it." Susan Kincaid's words hung in the air like smoke, dense and choking, slowly creeping into every corner of the room. "The curse. It wasn't just your family's. It was ours too." Those words, simple yet profound, rocked me to my core. This wasn't just about one family's dark history. It was a shared burden, one that had haunted both the Kincaids and the Marshalls for generations. The violence, the betrayal, the guilt, everything was interconnected, and none of us had been immune. I sat there, my mind racing. "What do you mean?" I finally managed to ask. "What promise? What curse?" Susan let out a long, tired breath as she sat back in her chair, the weight of years of silence pressing on her shoulders. "It's a long story, Evelyn. But I'll tell you what I know, because you have the right to understand it all." Claire sat beside me, her eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and fear. She had never imagined that our search for the truth would lead us to something so vast, something so much darker than we could have ever anticipated. Susan's voice dropped to a whisper. "Your grandfather, James, and my father, Thomas, were once friends. They grew up together in this town, they shared secrets, they made promises to each other. But everything changed when James met your grandmother, Ruth. She was everything to him, his world, his anchor. But Margaret Dawson..." Her eyes flickered to the window, her face clouded with old pain. "Margaret was something else entirely. She wasn't just the other woman, Evelyn. She was the woman who threatened everything James had built. The woman who made him question his very soul." I sat forward, my heart hammering in my chest. "What do you mean? Was she in love with him?" Susan nodded slowly, her eyes distant. "Yes, but it wasn't just love. Margaret wasn't from this town. She was an outsider, wild, free, untamed. And James, he couldn't resist her. He tried to hide it from your grandmother, but it was impossible. The affair went on for months, and it drove your grandfather to madness. But the real damage happened when my father got involved." She paused, as though weighing her next words carefully. "James promised Thomas that he would end the affair with Margaret, that he would make it right. But he didn't. Instead, he told Margaret he was leaving her, that he couldn't live with the guilt anymore. But Margaret, she wouldn't let him go. She didn't want to lose him, not after everything they'd shared. And when she found out James was lying, when she found out that he was planning to stay with Ruth, she confronted him." Susan's eyes flickered to the floor, as if she was seeing it all unfold before her again. "My father, Thomas, he tried to intervene. He tried to stop Margaret from destroying James's marriage, but he was too late. That's when the fight broke out. Your grandfather, in a fit of rage, struck Thomas. He hit him hard enough to knock him down, and that was the end of their friendship." I sat there in stunned silence. The violence, the betrayal, it was all because of Margaret. But it wasn't just about the affair. It was about the promises made and broken. It was about the power struggle between two men who had been bound by loyalty and trust, until that loyalty was shattered. "But that's not the worst part," Susan continued, her voice now shaking with emotion. "The worst part is what happened after. The secret that no one talked about." I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. "What secret?" Susan's eyes locked onto mine, and for the first time, I saw the full depth of her grief. James had promised Thomas that he would never tell Ruth about the affair, that he would protect their family. But after the fight, when my father left town, James was consumed with guilt. And that guilt ate away at him. It haunted him for the rest of his life. It's what turned him into the man you remember, the man who was always angry, always distant. My heart ached. I had spent so many years trying to understand my grandfather, trying to make sense of the man I had loved and respected. But now I realized that everything had been tainted by lies, by guilt, by a promise broken. "And Margaret?" I asked softly. "What happened to her?" Susan's face tightened. "She left. She disappeared without a trace. Some people say she went to another town, others say she died in a car accident. But no one really knows. And I think she was the one who cursed us. Not just your family, Evelyn, but mine too." I blinked in shock. "What do you mean she cursed us?" Susan took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she spoke. "James never forgave himself for what happened. He never told Ruth the truth. He never confessed to her, never apologized for what he'd done. And that silence, that refusal to come clean, it poisoned everything. It poisoned his relationship with Ruth, it poisoned your family, and it poisoned mine. Margaret was the last person he truly loved, and when she left him, it shattered him. He carried that pain with him until the day he died." I sat back, overwhelmed. Everything we had uncovered, the affair, the violence, the broken promises, had led us here. But what now? What was the point of knowing all of this? Susan met my gaze, her eyes filled with a mixture of sorrow and understanding. "The curse isn't about revenge, Evelyn. It's about what happens when you refuse to face the truth. When you live your life with secrets that fester, they destroy everything you've worked for. And the worst part is, you don't even realize it's happening until it's too late." I felt the weight of her words settle into my chest. The curse wasn't some supernatural force, some curse cast by Margaret's anger. It was a curse of silence, of denial, of refusing to confront the truth. And it had been passed down through the generations. I stood up, feeling a sense of finality that I hadn't felt before. The truth had been uncovered. The secrets had been exposed. It wasn't about revenge or anger anymore. It was about healing. "I don't know what comes next," I said quietly. "But I know this. I'm not going to let this curse define my family anymore." Susan nodded, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. "It's never too late, Evelyn. But it starts with you. It starts with breaking the silence." I turned to Claire, who had been silent throughout the conversation. Her face was pale, but there was a spark of hope in her eyes. "We can't change the past," I said, my voice steady. "But we can change how it shapes our future." Claire nodded. "We'll break the curse, Mom. Together." And with that I knew. The reckoning had come. The past had been faced, and the future was ours to shape. The days that followed were a blur. Claire and I spent hours talking, processing everything we had learned, everything we had uncovered about our family's past. The weight of the secrets, the violence, the betrayal, the endless cycles of guilt and silence, felt heavy, but at the same time, there was a strange sense of liberation in it all. We had dug deep, and now there was nowhere to go but forward. We couldn't undo what had been done, but we could decide how we would move forward. We could choose to break the curse that had haunted us, and in doing so, we could finally reclaim our lives. But healing wasn't as simple as just making a decision. It wasn't something that happened overnight. It took time, it took work, and it took confronting the parts of ourselves we had been avoiding. That afternoon, as I sat by the window, watching the sunlight filter through the trees in the backyard, I felt a deep sense of peace wash over me. The house, once filled with tension and unspoken pain, now felt different, felt lighter somehow. It was as though the weight of the past was no longer pressing down on us. The air seemed fresher, the days brighter. Claire walked into the room, her face calm, her steps sure. She sat down next to me, her presence comforting in a way I couldn't fully explain. She had changed over the last few days. There was a quiet strength in her now, something that hadn't been there before. She had seen the darkness of our family's past, but instead of letting it destroy her, she had let it fuel her desire to heal. "I've been thinking," Claire said softly, breaking the silence. "I know we can't change what happened, but maybe we can start by making our family whole again. Maybe we can create new memories, good ones to replace the bad. Her words struck a chord in me. New memories, a new future. It wasn't just about breaking the curse. It was about rebuilding what had been broken. Rebuilding our family one small step at a time. I think you're right, I said, my voice filled with a mix of sadness and hope. But we can't do it alone. We need to reach out to the rest of the family. We need to start talking, to stop hiding from the truth. Claire nodded. It's going to be hard. But we have to do it, Mom. We have to show them that we're stronger than the past. That we won't let it control us anymore. I felt a lump form in my throat as I thought about my children and grandchildren. They had always been a source of joy, but I knew that the legacy of silence had affected them too. We couldn't let it continue. We had to confront the past, not just for us but for them as well. I'll call them, I said, my decision firm. We'll have a family meeting. It's time to tell them everything. To stop hiding. The conversation felt heavy, but it also felt right. The burden of keeping the truth to ourselves was too great. It had to be shared, and in sharing it we could begin to heal. Over the next few days I reached out to my children, telling them we needed to have a serious conversation. They didn't understand at first, they never did, not fully, but when they arrived I could see it in their eyes. They knew something had shifted. They could feel the change in the air, just as Claire and I had. We sat together in the living room, my children and grandchildren gathered around, their faces a mix of confusion and curiosity. I could see the tension in their eyes. They were waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for the moment when the past would come crashing down on them. Mom, what's going on? My son Brian asked, his voice tight with concern. You've been acting different. Like something's happened. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. But I didn't hesitate. Couldn't. There's something I need to tell all of you, I began, my voice steady but filled with emotion. Something I should have told you a long time ago. Something about our family's past. Something we've been hiding for years. I glanced at Claire, who was sitting beside me. She gave me an encouraging nod, and I felt a surge of strength from her. This wasn't just my story to tell, it was ours. It was our family's story. I told them everything. I told them about James's affair with Margaret Dawson, about the fight with Thomas Kincaid, and the violence that had followed. I told them about the promise James had made to Kincaid and the guilt that had haunted him for the rest of his life. I told them about the curse, the silence that had been passed down through the generations. It wasn't easy. I could see the shock in their eyes, the disbelief. They were hearing things about their grandfather and great-grandfather that they never expected. But as I spoke, I could see the walls begin to fall. Slowly, their expressions softened. They were processing it, understanding it, accepting it. When I finished, there was a long silence. No one spoke for a few moments, but the tension in the room had changed. The air felt lighter, not as heavy with unspoken words. The truth was out, and with it came the possibility of healing. Finally, my daughter-in-law, Mary, spoke up. I can't believe all of this. But I'm glad you told us. We've all been carrying pieces of this, not even knowing it. Maybe it's time we stop hiding from the past. I nodded, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. It's time, Mary. Time to let go of the past and start living in the present. That night, after the family meeting, I went to bed with a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. The past was still there, but it no longer had the power to control us. We had faced it together as a family, and in doing so we had taken the first step toward healing. The curse wasn't gone, not entirely, but we had broken its hold on us. And that was enough for now. It's strange how much power a simple word can hold. Forgiveness. For so long it seemed like an impossible thing to give, let alone receive. But now, in the aftermath of all we had uncovered, forgiveness felt like the only thing that could truly heal the wounds that had been festering for so long. It wasn't just about forgiving my grandfather. It wasn't about forgiving Margaret Dawson or Thomas Kincaid. No, the forgiveness had to come from within. I had to forgive myself for not seeing the truth sooner, for holding on to the past, for letting it define my family's future. I had spent my life pretending that everything was fine. But now I saw that the only way to break free from the chains of the past was to let go. Let go of the anger. Let go of the hurt. And most of all, let go of the fear. Claire and I spent the weeks that followed rebuilding our family. We spent time together, learning to communicate openly, learning to be vulnerable with each other. It wasn't easy. There were moments of discomfort, moments when the past threatened to rise up again. But we faced it together. And slowly we began to heal. I started visiting the graves of those who had passed, not with a sense of grief, but with a sense of peace. I talked to them, telling them everything I had never said. I told them I forgave them. And I told myself the same thing. For the first time in years I felt light. Felt free. The curse wasn't gone completely, but it didn't have the power it once did. We had taken back control of our lives. We had chosen to forgive, to rebuild, and to move forward. And now, as I sit here reflecting on everything we've been through, I know one thing for certain. The past is never truly gone. But the legacy we leave behind doesn't have to be defined by it. We can choose to create a new legacy. One of healing. One of love. One of forgiveness. And as I look at my family now, I see it. I see the future we've built. It's brighter than I ever imagined it could be. This journey was long. It was painful. But in the end it was worth it. 'Cause we found peace. And that peace, that forgiveness, is the true legacy we leave behind. Thank you for being with us on this journey. If you followed this story, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to my channel. You won't want to miss what comes next.